They thought he was dead. They sealed his coffin. But when the grave was opened, he was still breathing. This is the unbelievable survival story of Colonel Wichai. Like, share, and subscribe for more shocking stories on Zimo Voice. In the heart of Southeast Asia, within a country known for its beauty, its traditions, and its deep military culture, a story emerged that still echoes like a haunting legend. A story of betrayal, of survival, and of loyalty so powerful that it defied the very boundaries between life and death. This is the true story of Colonel Wichai Wangsuria and his faithful dog, Lucky. For decades, Colonel Wichai was a symbol of discipline and honor within the military ranks. He had risen not through corruption or politics, but through loyalty, integrity, and sheer determination. To his soldiers, he was more than a commander. He was a teacher, a mentor, and in many ways, a father figure. But in the shadows of his success, envy grew. Whispers spread in corridors where light rarely reached. Rivals who smiled in his presence plotted behind closed doors. Some feared his honesty. Others envied his influence. In the silent machinery of military politics, enemies are often closer than friends. And then came the night that changed everything. After a late meeting inside the camp, Wichai walked alone through the narrow, dim corridor of the barracks. His boots echoed softly against the concrete floor. He believed he was heading home, but death was already waiting for him. From behind, a hand clamped down on his mouth. Before he could shout, before he could even struggle, a needle pierced his neck. A surge of venom entered his veins. His vision blurred, his muscles weakened, and the world tilted into darkness. By dawn, news spread like wildfire. Colonel Wichai was dead. Official reports claimed a sudden heart attack. His body, they said, would be buried with honors. Soldiers mourned, officers saluted, and his coffin was lowered into ground. But the truth was far more terrifying. Colonel Wichai was not dead. Beneath the weight of soil, trapped in a coffin of silence, he opened his eyes. He could not scream. He could not move. The poison had paralyzed his body, leaving only the prison of his mind alive. And in the crowd above that day, only one creature seemed to know the truth. Lucky, his loyal dog. As the coffin was lowered, Lucky barked, snarled, and threw himself against the mourners. He clawed at the earth, desperate to stop what was happening. Soldiers tried to pull him away, but the dog would not leave. When the last handful of dirt fell, Lucky let out a howl so chilling that even the hardest men on the field felt a shiver run down their spines. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, Lucky returned to the grave. Rain poured, the sun scorched. Hunger hollowed his body, but Lucky never left. He scratched at the earth until his paws bled. At night, his howls pierced the silence of the camp. Some soldiers began to whisper. Perhaps the colonel was never dead. But who would dare question the official story? In the military, doubt could be as dangerous as treason. Then, after nearly a year, one soldier began to suspect the impossible. Private Ardit was young, but he had carried the colonel's coffin on the day of the funeral. He had seen the desperate eyes of Lucky. He had heard the dog's endless cries. At first, he dismissed them as grief, but the persistence was too great, too unnatural. Why would a dog remain for a whole year if something was not terribly wrong? One night, Ardit sat beside Lucky and offered food. For the first time, the dog licked his hand gently, as if pleading, "Help me." And so, the secret began. Ardit confided in Lieutenant Det, one of Wichai's most loyal former students. Together, under the cover of darkness, armed with nothing but shovels and a single lantern, they followed Lucky to the grave. The night was silent, the air heavy with dread. Lucky dug furiously, his claws scraping against the soil. The two men shoveled beside him, hearts racing. Hours passed until, at last, the iron sound of metal striking would froze them in place. They had reached the coffin. With trembling hands, Ardit pried the lid open. A foul stench filled the air, but inside, something moved. Colonel Wichai was alive. His face was skeletal, his eyes sunken, his nails long and broken from clawing inside the coffin. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, defying all logic, against every natural law. He had survived an entire year underground. What followed exposed betrayal at the highest levels of power, unleashed violence that echoed to the forests, and proved once again the eternal bond between man and dog. The discovery of Colonel Wichai alive should have been a moment of triumph, but instead, it marked the beginning of an even darker chapter. Ardit and Lieutenant Det carried his frail body out of the grave under the cover of midnight. His skin was pale, his lips cracked, his hands scarred from desperate scratching inside the coffin. His breath came in shallow, rasping gasps. And yet, he lived. They brought him to a discreet private clinic on the edge of town, avoiding all official military hospitals. The colonel's survival had to remain a secret. If the men who betrayed him discovered that he was still alive, they would not hesitate to finish the job. Doctors examined him in disbelief. His condition was critical: emaciation, severe dehydration, and signs of long-term trauma. But what shocked them most was his lungs. They showed no signs of collapse. His organs, though weakened, were functional. "This is impossible," one doctor whispered. "No human survives a year underground without air, food, or water." Colonel Wichai could barely speak, but when he did, his voice trembled. He described fragments of memory: the sting of poison, the weight of the coffin lid closing, the darkness pressing in. He remembered scratching until his nails split, screaming until his throat gave out. And he remembered something else: sounds outside his coffin, scratching, clawing, every night. It was Lucky. The dog had not just mourned. He had fought tooth and nail to keep his master alive. But survival had a price. The conspirators soon sensed that something was wrong. Strange men began lurking near the clinic. Figures with no identification entered the hospital corridors, pretending to be doctors. They carried clipboards, but their eyes searched the rooms too carefully. One night, a man entered Colonel Wichai's room, claiming to be a night physician. But Lucky, who had followed his master even here, snarled viciously. His growls filled the room with warning. The intruder panicked and fled, slamming the door behind him. It was clear the colonel was being hunted. Ardit and Det made the only choice they could. They fled, carrying Wichai between them. With Lucky limping at their side, they escaped through a bathroom window into the night. But the enemy was already waiting. Gunfire erupted in the streets. Black-suited men with silenced weapons closed in from all sides. Ardit and Det fought back with everything they had, dragging the colonel through narrow alleys. Lucky lunged at the attackers, biting, clawing, taking a bullet to his side, but refusing to fall. His loyalty was stronger than his pain. Through the chaos, they disappeared into the forest outside the city. For hours they ran, the sound pursuit never far behind. When hope seemed lost, Lucky staggered back, carrying wild medicinal leaves in his mouth. He dropped them at Wichai's chest, whining softly. Somehow, the dog had found herbs that slowed the bleeding. It was a miracle, but it would not last forever. At dawn, they stumbled upon a ranger outpost. Relief flooded their hearts, until an explosion tore the building apart. The outpost had been rigged. They had been betrayed again. And from the smoke emerged the face of the true traitor, Major Cryzorn. Once Colonel Wichai's most trusted subordinate, now his executioner. With a smirk, Cryzorn stepped forward. "You should have stayed in your grave, Colonel. This time, there will be no escape." A brutal fight erupted. Ardit, driven by rage, battled Cryzorn hand to hand. Their fists struck with years of betrayal behind them. Finally, Ardit managed to knock him to the ground. But before Cryzorn could reveal the identity of the mastermind behind the conspiracy, a sniper's bullet silenced him forever. The deeper truth remained buried. The jungle echoed with gunfire as more enemies closed in. But just as the circle tightened, salvation arrived. Reinforcements, special forces loyal to the colonel, stormed in, answering a desperate distress signal. The firefight raged until the enemy melted back into shadows. Colonel Wichai was saved once more. Yet the cost was heavy. Lucky lay bleeding in Ardit's arms, his breathing shallow, his eyes dimming. For 3 days, the faithful dog hovered between life and death. Ardit never left his side, begging him to hold on. And then one morning, Lucky opened his eyes. Weak, scarred, but alive. Weeks later, justice came. An investigation unmasked the corrupt officers who had orchestrated the colonel's downfall. Some were stripped of their rank, others imprisoned. The army was forced to reckon with its own shadows. And in a ceremony that drew the eyes of a nation, Colonel Wichai stood once more in uniform. Ardhit and Det were awarded medals of honor. But the loudest cheer came when a small figure limped onto stage. Lucky, the dog who had howled for a year, the dog who had clawed at the grave, the dog who had saved his master, was given a medal of bravery. The crowd erupted in applause. Soldiers saluted, and in that moment, a dog became more than a companion. He became a symbol of loyalty, of courage, of love stronger than death itself. The story of Colonel Wichai and Lucky became a legend, a reminder that even in a world of betrayal and cruelty, there exists a loyalty so pure it can raise the dead. And so, the legend of Colonel Wichai and his loyal companion, Lucky, lives on. A man betrayed by his own, buried alive for a year, and yet, through sheer willpower, the courage of two young soldiers, and the unbreakable loyalty of a dog, he returned from a grave. The conspiracy that tried to silence him was exposed, and though some answers remain hidden in the shadows, one truth shines above all others. Loyalty can outlive death, and courage can turn the impossible into reality. Colonel Wichai may have carried scars, both on his body and his soul, but he stood tall again. And by his side was Lucky, wounded, limping, but proud. Together, they reminded the world of a simple, eternal truth. Sometimes, a dog's heart can be braver than any soldier's. If this story moved you, let us know what you think. Write your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible untold stories.